On a crisp winter morning in the French Alps, where the first light of dawn draped the jagged peaks in hues of gold and rose, and the air itself seemed thinner, sharper, alive with the quiet hum of a mountain that tolerated men, but never welcomed them. 32-year-old Lucas Meyer stood outside the chalet near Chamonix, fastening the buckles on his boots with hands that trembled, not from cold, but from anticipation. His breath curling upward in pale clouds that vanished into the vastness above, and in his chest beat the restless heart of a man who had always sought the edge of risk, the intoxicating line where danger and euphoria blurred, where one wrong move meant ruin, but one perfect glide meant glory. And as he adjusted his goggles and slung his skis over his shoulder, he ignored the warnings he had heard all week, warnings of unstable snowpack, of too much recent snowfall layered precariously atop brittle, old sheets of ice, warnings spoken by local guides, murmured by ski
Patrol officers, even printed in bold letters on bright red signs, nailed into the snow near the resort's boundaries, signs that screamed, "Avalanche risk, do not enter." But to Lucas, who had grown up breathing the chill air of the Swiss Alps and believed himself fluent in the mountain's secret language, such warnings were not deterrents, but provocations, invitations to prove that he, unlike the tourists who skied timidly within marked trails, could read the snow, sense its moods, dance upon its surface without falling victim to its wrath. And so he pushed forward, boots crunching across the frozen crust, skis slicing into the powder as he made his way toward a slope untouched, a forbidden stretch of dazzling white that gleamed like a blank canvas, begging for the first stroke of an artist's brush. The morning was deceptive in its kindness, the sky clear, the sunlight pure, the air filled with that particular stillness that feels eternal, as though the mountain itself had paused in reverence. But beneath that flawless surface, danger coiled unseen, layers of weakness stacked upon one another, waiting only for weight, for vibration, for a skier's reckless arc to snap the balance and unleash chaos. Yet Lucas, grinning as he clipped into his bindings, felt only the thrill, the delicious anticipation of being the first to carve lines down this forbidden face. And when he pushed off, launching himself into the slope, the sensation was nothing short of divine. Skis slicing in elegant arcs, snow spraying like diamonds in the sun, speed gathering in his veins like fire, and for a few perfect moments, it seemed as though he had conquered both gravity and fear. But the mountain does not forgive arrogance, and in the depths of that slope, something ancient and fragile gave way, a sound like the low groan of the earth itself, muffled but unmistakable, a cracking thunder that vibrated through the ground beneath his skis, and before Lucas could process, before his instincts could even scream, the world shifted, snow breaking, the surface collapsing, the slope transforming in an instant, from playground to death trap, as the avalanche was born, a tidal wave of white tearing free from the mountain's skin, roaring with a force that drowned thought and swallowed sound, an unstoppable surge of ice and powder that devoured everything in its path. Lucas tried to outrun it, legs pumping, body leaning, skis slashing desperately at the collapsing slope. But against an avalanche, speed is meaningless. It moves faster than any man, faster than any plea for mercy. And within seconds, it caught him, lifted him, hurled him like a ragdoll in a storm. His skis ripped from his feet, his poles snapped, his body tossed and spun in a maelstrom of snow that pummeled him from every side, choking, suffocating. A weight that grew heavier with each second, until suddenly, brutally, it stopped, and he was buried, entombed, sealed in darkness so complete it seemed the world itself had ended. At first he thrashed, instinct screaming to fight, to dig upward, to claw through the crushing weight. But the snow was no longer soft powder. It was compacted cement, a prison that pressed from every side, unyielding, suffocating, and each movement drained what little oxygen remained in his lungs. Panic exploding as his chest heaved, his breath came shallow, and he realized with a clarity more terrifying than the avalanche itself, that most who are buried this way die not from broken bones, but from suffocation. That the mountain kills, not with drama, but with silence, smothering its victims in white oblivion. Lucas forced himself to stop, to remember the training drilled into him years ago during avalanche safety courses. Don't panic. Conserve air, carve space near your mouth if you can. And with trembling, frozen fingers he clawed out a small hollow, just enough to hold a bubble of breath. An air pocket that became his only salvation, a fragile sphere of life in a tomb of death. Time lost meaning there in the dark. There was no sun, no stars, only the crushing silence, the weight pressing in. The slow creep of cold that seeped through his skin, into his blood, into his bones. Numbness spreading like venom, his heartbeat slowing, his mind drifting between sharp terror and the seductive pull of sleep. And in that liminal haze, memories came, hallucinations that cut deeper than the cold. His little sister's laughter on a childhood ski trip, his parents' voices echoing from the warm chalet by Lake Lucerne, the face of the woman he had left in Zurich because he could never settle, never stop chasing mountains. And now in this icy coffin, regret burned hotter than fear. Was this how it ended, buried nameless in the Alps? Another fool who thought himself untouchable, another body to be found when the thaw came. Above him, the mountain seemed calm again, its fury smoothed into deceptive stillness. But already rescue had begun. The ski patrol had spotted the collapse. Radios crackled with urgency. Helicopters were dispatched, and trained avalanche dogs bounded across the snow. Noses low, hearts relentless, handlers calling out coordinates as they raced against the cruelest clock of all. Because every rescuer knew the numbers. 15 minutes, maybe 20, before oxygen runs out. Before hypothermia clenches its grip. Before silence becomes eternal. Beneath, Lucas fought to stay awake, to focus on the shallow breaths echoing in his tiny bubble, counting each inhale, each exhale, forcing himself not to waste air, not to scream, though every nerve begged for release, every instinct begged to thrash, and still, he clung to one thought. Don't give up. Don't let the mountain take you. Hours seemed to pass in that coffin of snow, time stretching like an elastic band about to snap. Hallucinations bleeding into reality, shadows whispering, voices calling his name from far away. And when at last the distant bark of a rescue dog filtered through the layers above him, muffled but undeniable, Lucas's fading heart surged with a fragile spark of hope. Shovels bit into snow. Voices shouted commands in French and German. The crunch of boots pressed closer. And then, light, a piercing beam breaking into the darkness. A gloved hand clawing through. Air rushing in, sweet and sharp. And Lucas gasped, coughing, eyes wide as rescuers dug faster. Their faces appearing like angels against the sky, pulling him free from the mountain's grasp. His body was stiff, lips blue, pulse weak but present, and as they wrapped him in thermal blankets, strapped oxygen to his face, loaded him onto a stretcher, the helicopter's blades thundered above. But even then, The Alps fought to keep him. An aftershock of snow rumbling loose, a smaller slide cascading nearby, forcing rescuers to shield his body, to push forward with grit and desperation, until at last they lifted him into the aircraft, the mountain shrinking below as Lucas was carried toward survival. In the hospital at Chamonix, doctors marveled. Buried nearly 3 hours, far beyond the usual window of survival, and yet alive, saved by the fragile miracle of that air pocket, by his stubborn refusal to surrender, and by the relentless courage of rescuers who would not let the Alps claim him. News spread across Europe in hours. Headlines declaring, "Trapped in the Alps, skier survives avalanche with just an air pocket." Footage of rescue dogs bounding across the slopes replayed on screens. Experts debated the odds, calling it a 1 in 1,000 survival. And Lucas, lying pale and exhausted in his hospital bed, whispered through cracked lips, "The mountain gave me a second chance." But even as the world applauded, even as strangers sent letters of admiration, Lucas carried within him the shadow of that tomb, the crushing silence, the breath stolen, the fragile bubble of air that had been the only line between life and death. And he knew, no matter how many slopes he skied, no matter how many peaks he conquered, he would never again mistake arrogance for skill, never again forget the truth written in snow and silence, that the mountain allows no victories, only survival, and sometimes survival itself is the greatest miracle of all.